Have you ever heard of a criminal attacking a judge right in the middle of a session? Or how a mob of enraged women beat a rapist to death right in the courtroom? Or maybe you've heard of a gangster drinking poison upon hearing his verdict. My name is Knox, and today I will tell you about the most high-profile and shocking deaths that have occurred in courts around the world. You will learn how criminals turn the place of justice into a battlefield. And at the end, I will share a story that will leave you literally stunned in amazement. Attack on a witness. Imagine a courtroom, tense silence, all eyes fixed on the witness. And suddenly, the defendant jumps up, grabs a pen, and lunges at the person who is supposed to testify against him. This is not a scene from an action movie, it's a true story. And yes, in the next second, gunshots rang out. How did an ordinary court proceeding turn into a deadly drama? What drove this person to such a desperate act? And why does his story still spark heated debates? Now I will tell you everything. Still Angel is a name that has forever remained in the criminal chronicles of the United. A member of a street gang from Utah, he started his journey with petty crimes. By the age of 14, he was involved in robberies, and by 20, he had become one of the key figures in the TCG criminal organization, one of the most dangerous in the state. Robbery, armed assaults, extortion, all of this was part of his career. But what drove him to such rage? While giving his testimony, Angelo suddenly grabs his lawyer's pen and lunges at the witness. His goal is clear, to prevent the witness from saying a word. But the U.S. Marshal reacts instantly, 4 shots, and Angelo dies on the spot. Later, his family tried to contest the Marshal's actions, claiming that the shooting was excessive. But the court justified the law enforcement officer's actions, pointing to the threat to the witness. This guy turned the courtroom into chaos, trying to avoid punishment. And what if I told you that the next defendant wanted to avoid prison so badly that he went even further? Michael Merriam. Michael Moran was a man who was used to getting everything out of life. A successful trader from Wall Street, he amassed a fortune, traveled the world, conquered the highest peaks, including Everest, and collected works of art. His life seemed perfect. A luxurious mansion in Arizona, Picasso paintings on the walls, a Rolls-Royce in the garage. But behind this picture was a story of debt, despair, and ultimately disaster. 2009, Michael sets his mansion on fire, not for show, but for the insurance. The plan was thought out to the last detail. 4 small fire spots, a diving suit to escape the flames, and a dramatic interview from a hospital bed about the miraculous rescue. But the firefighters noticed inconsistencies, and the insurance detectives soon uncovered his plan. Charges of arson and insurance fraud threatened him with a prison sentence of 7 to 21 years. The trial lasted 3 years, and finally, in June 2012, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. All eyes are on Marin, and he, calmly folding his hands, brings them to his face. A few minutes later, he starts gasping for breath, collapses on the floor, and dies. Later, experts found out that he had taken cyanide, a poison that kills almost instantly. The police found a suicide note to his son in his car. Marin seemed prepared for this outcome, as if he knew there was no other way for him. This death sparked a lot of discussions. Some talked about how legal proceedings can drive a person to their breaking point. Others spoke about cynicism and the willingness to do anything for money. But the question remains, did prison really scare Marin more than death? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. And ahead, another incredible story awaits you. A blockbuster-style murder. A very interesting case occurred in one of the Russian cities. The accused was present in the courtroom, a young man with a lot of connections and money. He did a terrible crime to a 14-year-old girl. Her father, a former military veteran of the Afghan war, stood against him. And this is a very important fact that should definitely not be forgotten. So, as it turned out, influential relatives tried to bribe the father even before the trial. They offered him a lot of money to withdraw his statement from the police. But he did not agree to that at all, so the defense team took a different approach and sent a few men to him to resolve the issue by force. Naturally, this did not work with the former military man. The men who attacked him ended up getting hit in the face themselves, and based on such actions, the father of the victim decided that there would be no justice. He began preparing for the trial, but in a very unusual way. He found instructions for making throwing knives and made them himself. It would have been easier to buy them, but then he could be tracked. He also trained for a long time, so there was no doubt he would hit the target at the right moment. In the courtroom, right after the verdict was announced, which, as expected, was too lenient, the father of the victim jumped up and threw several knives at the attacker. He managed to throw a total of 3 knives, and all of them hit the target perfectly. The first and second struck right in the heart, while the third hit the throat. Experts say that just one would have been enough, as all of them were fatal. It all happened so quickly that the police didn't even have time to react. In the end, the defendant collapsed dead right after the verdict. But the most important thing is that this man received a fair sentence, which happens very rarely. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but there's one big but. It's a suspended sentence, so he was released right in the courtroom. And personally, I'm glad it turned out this way. All that's left is to wish health to his daughter, because she, according to her father, has tried to take her own life several times because of what happened. Justice has prevailed. Well, the hero of the next story, in my opinion, deserves respect. One day, a man from Dagestan learned that his 14-year-old son, who was riding a scooter, was killed by a car. Naturally, this story shook the entire neighborhood where it happened, but for the family of the deceased, it was probably the worst day. And the only thing that could possibly help in this situation is justice, so that the killer would face serious punishment. However, it seems that this was not meant to happen. As it turned out, the driver was the 21-year-old son of a former prosecutor. On top of that, he was the grandson of the former director of the local brandy factory. In general, a very influential young man from an extremely wealthy family. And it was clear to everyone that under the judicial system of Dagestan, this guy would face no consequences. In fact, the father of the deceased shared the same opinion. During the trial, it was clear that everyone had simply been bribed. The judge handed down a sentence of 1.5 years for such a crime. And no, it wasn't imprisonment, just restrictions. This meant the man simply had to live in one apartment, not move anywhere, and follow certain restrictions. And this, essentially, was for murder. A real horror. The father, of course, completely disagreed with this, but he was prepared for it, so he brought a firearm with him and shot the young man and his lawyer. The two of them died on the spot, and, it seems to me, only in this case did justice prevail. The father will now have to answer for the murder, and most likely he faces a life sentence. But what if a person isn't trying to defend their family's honor, but is just losing control out of hurt and anger? He killed a woman in the courtroom, court session. Everything is calm, participants are listening to the verdict. And suddenly, a man jumps up from his seat, pulls out a knife, and stabs a woman sitting just a few feet away from him. Panic, screams, blood. The beginning of this story took place in 2008 at a playground, starting with a small conflict. One dad got into an argument with another mom. The essence of everything that happened is completely absurd. The woman asked to let her child have a turn on the swings, and the man responded by starting to argue and calling her an Islamist, a terrorist, and a promiscuous woman. Well, you know how these conflicts at playgrounds are. They're always like that. So, the whole story continued in court. The offended mom decided to go to the police about what happened, and by the end of that same year, the court found the man guilty and imposed an €800 fine on him. For some reason, the dad disagreed with the punishment, and he decided to appeal the case in a higher court. Well, what happened there shocked everyone. In the courtroom was the woman that the guy had insulted, her husband, as well as the jurors and police officers. And at one point, this very outspoken dad decided that the €800 fine was too high, and since the court didn't want to appeal this decision, he felt that justice needed to prevail. He just jumped up, ran up to that woman, and stabbed her several times. On top of that, he also injured her husband and a few other people. The medics who arrived at the scene could only confirm the woman's death. The other victims were luckier, as they managed to survive during this massacre. Well, in response to the question, how could the man bring a weapon into the courtroom? A representative of the court answered, As it turned out, there is no security provided at all for civil court proceedings. So, if he wanted to, this psychopath could have brought in a grenade. Overall, it's a real nightmare. But David Paradise was not so lucky. During an argument with his girlfriend, he inflicted serious injuries on her, which led to her death. Naturally, for this, he ended up in the defendant's chair. But what happened to him next shocks me. The thing is, before one of the hearings, he decided to kill the judge. He approached him from behind and began inflicting serious injuries with some sharp object. The police intervened quite quickly. An officer drew his gun and shot the defendant. The most interesting part is that he didn't manage to kill the judge. Even though there were many injuries, the doctors were able to help the victim. He even came to himself quite quickly. But David didn't survive the attack. The gunshot wounds were fatal, so he died right in the courtroom. A dispute over a child. But what amazes me is the following story. It seems like what could happen over a regular family quarrel. In the Estonian city of Jovi, the court was hearing the most mundane civil case about establishing paternity. A 24-year-old woman was demanding that a man be recognized as the father of her son. However, the case never actually went to trial. Why? Because this man simply took out a revolver from his pocket and shot the woman at point-blank range. But even after that, he didn't stop and killed her mother. Apparently, he didn't care much for this girl. Or maybe she and her mom just wanted to frame him. Either way, the man did what he intended. And then he just placed the gun on the table, went down a floor, and turned himself in to the police. Unfortunately, the story is silent about what happened to him next. Well, I believe that such an act can never be justified. It would be one thing if he acted justly, like in previous cases, but here, it was the opposite. The crowd dealt with the rapist. Another similar case happened in the Indian city of Nagpur. The truth is, the story there is much shorter, and of course, I condemn what happened during that meeting, but it seems to me that it was bound to happen sooner or later. What am I talking about? I'm referring to the fact that there was a trial in Nagpur against a man accused of raping women and children. Naturally, he faced a significant sentence for such crimes. But, as is often the case, connections and money could have helped him avoid serious punishment. So society decided to take matters into its own hands during the session. A crowd of women and children burst into the courtroom. There were about 20 people in total, of which 14 were adults, and the rest were minors. It's quite possible that they were all relatives of the victims. So, they didn't just barge in for no reason. They were all armed with knives and other sharp objects. And as you might have guessed, their target was that very man, who was about to receive his sentence. As a result of the injuries he sustained, the man died. The medics had no chance of saving him. As for what happened to the attackers, it's unclear. According to some reports, they all managed to escape after the attack. In short, society carried out a real act of vigilante justice. Brian Nichols turned the courtroom into a bloody slaughterhouse. The defendant, who was facing life in prison, didn't just escape. He launched a real hunt for people. It all started when they were taking off his handcuffs for a change of clothes. Nichols struck the guard, took the keys to the weapon safe, pulled out a gun, and started shooting. The first victim was the judge who was supposed to deliver the sentence. Nichols entered the courtroom, coldly shot him in the back of the head, and then went to look for his ex-girlfriend, whom he had previously assaulted. She was only saved by the fact that she was late to the hearing, but Nichols didn't stop. He killed 2 more people before the police were able to apprehend him. His sentence is 3 life terms. The only question is, was such rage and the escape attempt worth the lives he took? Lastly, I would like to share a story from an Italian courtroom. In short, a young man decided for some reason to kill his ex-wife right in the courtroom. And the scariest part, in my opinion, is that this court was very well protected. It had metal detectors and X-ray machines. In short, right in the courtroom, during a heated argument with his ex-wife, he pulled out a gun and fired several shots at her and her uncle. As a result of the incident, 3 people died, as the police who arrived on the scene shot the man himself. And this is yet another case proving that it's not in vain that people around the world take our safety so seriously. What do you think? Which of these cases could be justified? Personally, I think that the man who killed the defendant with throwing knives in the courtroom with professional accuracy shouldn't have been blamed. And you know where else we need pros? In our team. Friends, you have the opportunity to join our team. If you have video editing skills, can voice over videos in Russian, English, and other languages, or write interesting scripts, we would be happy to work with you. Message the Telegram bot, link in the description. And thank you for watching.